Let's give it up, a big Kansas City welcome for Marissa Sackler. Yeah. All right.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here and very honored to be here. And a big thank you also to Big Kansas City for having me. Will you forgive me? This is a new speech. If I have a security blanket in my hand, just in case I need a prompting. My name is Marissa, and I am passionate about bringing the worlds of technology and creativity, along with an entrepreneurial spirit and lean thinking, to the social good space and specifically to nonprofits. This may seem obvious to those of you in the for-profit world, but this is not something that is normal in the social good space until relatively recently, and it still continues to not be the norm, but in fact to be a small group of truly groundbreaking organizations that are embracing these principles. I was lucky enough 8 years ago to fall in with a group of incredible entrepreneurs who were starting to embrace these ideas in the social good space. Organizations like Charity Water, Tom's, Monique Pien, and Feed, these were groups that were social enterprises, nonprofits, and fashion businesses with a big difference. The one that had the greatest impact on me was Charity Water and Scott Harrison. As mentioned, Scott spoke at Big Omaha, I believe, a couple of years ago. They are a truly incredible organization. For those of you that don't know, they help bring clean drinking water to the 1 billion people on this planet who don't have any. They do so in an incredible way and in a really groundbreaking way. And I was incredibly fortunate to be a small part of that journey. I have been on that journey with them actually since before launch. Charity Water launched off my kitchen table. There were 3 of us. And that roller coaster ride to today, where they have over 60 employees and have raised over $100 million for clean water, what we like to call Charity Water Boot Camp, informed an enormous amount of my thinking, but also sparked my love of working with early stage organizations. I love early stage organizations and the crazy entrepreneurs that found them. I am the daughter of an entrepreneur, so I like to think that it's in my blood. So after the first few years of Charity Water that I still work closely with today, I started to work with a bunch of different early stage nonprofits that wanted to incorporate creativity and tech into their thinking. However, this was a big struggle. Most of them failed to really gain any growth. And it was in these late night conversation discussing these frustrations and these challenges at work that I was having one of those sort of where is your life going moments with a friend, and I hit on the idea for BSpace, a more holistic and comprehensive solution to allow organizations that wanted to take the best lessons for the for-profit sector and implement them, and this would allow them to do so and give them a runway to do that. I launched BSpace last November, and it's been its own roller coaster ride ever since. There were 4 key areas in building this idea from the 3 years ago when I had it into the incubator it is now. Numbers with meaning, thinking like a creative, the breadth and depth of scale, and organizational learning and well-being. All of these are extremely obvious in the for-profit sector, but sadly not so in the non-profit sector, and we're really hoping to change that. I'll start with numbers with meaning. Tech companies especially are brilliant at using data and analysis to drive their businesses forward, to refine their product. They use real-time customer feedback. They use sophisticated data dashboards, all of which they will constantly iterate and pivot to create better product and better profit. Nonprofits don't really do this. Traditionally, they have barely done this. This is starting to change, partly because new nonprofits rely far more heavily on technology to connect with their donors, but it's still not the norm by any means. Another reason for them not being able to really use numbers to refine their programs, to have greater impact, to be better organizations, is that most nonprofits are living hand to mouth. 1 in 4 nonprofits are working with less than 30 days cash on hand. That's 1 in 4 of the 1.4 million organizations of all sizes. That's an astounding statistic. It's the norm in startups, but not necessarily across the breadth of organizations that can be as old as 10 or 20 years. And when you're really scrabbling to get by day to day, your bandwidth, your attention gets sucked into these endlessly long to-do lists and this just struggle to survive. And so we really wanted at BSpace to give a safe space where people can truly have the space and the time and the financial runway to be more innovative, to use data to have greater impact. And it's being demanded by donors. I think that nonprofits should be held accountable. They should be able to prove the impact they're having using hard numbers. One of the leaders in this idea of impact philanthropy, which is essentially donors holding the groups responsible, I guess in the same way that an investor would hold or shareholder would hold a for-profit organization responsible, is the Robin Hood Foundation. And I met with them when I was building out BSpace's model, and they actually hired a professor from MIT who has a PhD in economics to build out their metric system. And when I met with him, he was explaining to me how these metrics are the same across the board. Doesn't matter, they work with domestic organizations in New York City that work with those who are struggling on the poverty line, from education to homelessness to food. But all of these organizations are held to the same set of metrics across Robin Hood's grant process, both existing organizations that they fund and new ones that they are looking to fund. And the one big lesson he taught me is that metrics have to come from your mission. And this was really important at BSpace because we weren't only looking to our groups, or incubees as we like to call them, to hold themselves accountable, for us to hold them accountable, for them to grow and keep refining their programming and their organizations, but we ourselves needed to hold BSpace accountable. Were we having the best impact on our groups? Were we doing the work that we had promised to do in our mission? So we have actually 2 sets of metrics, and we're constantly working on refining that and being the best version of what BSpace can be so that our groups can be the best versions of themselves. And for nonprofits, it's especially complicated because they have 2 groups of stakeholders. They have their donors, and then they have those that are affected by their work. And by using metrics to refine the programming to better help those who are affected by the work will also help you to have a better relationship with your donors by being able to prove that impact. So to have a clear and honest relationship with your donors is at sort of the basis of almost everything that nonprofits do, because without donors, they can't survive. And you have to have an authentic, clear relationship with your donors. Technology has allowed them to scale their donor databases in unprecedented ways. Online fundraising platforms and apps seem to be appearing, at least on my desk, at least once a week. Kickstarter launched their fundraising app last week. There are an enormous number of very brilliant people who are moving into this space and helping nonprofits scale like never before. But all of that is not as helpful as it can be if you as a nonprofit are not doing the work on the back end. Measuring how you convert a donor who comes to your website, how do you convert that donor into a one-time donor into a monthly donor? All of this will be fundamental to helping your organization to grow. Along with using data and metrics and analysis and numbers to connect with your donors, you also have to think like a creative. Nonprofits traditionally, again, were very bad at storytelling, very bad at branding. In fact, brand in the nonprofit space is a dirty word. It's not a word we use very often, but we're trying to change that. And you have to in order to connect with someone, you have to have a really authentic and honest story, and to keep donors coming back, to keep that connection. And I think in the past, I think we've all seen what are, quite frankly, ugly nonprofit websites and newsletters. They're not inspiring. They don't make you want to learn their story. And that needs to change. And the people who really were at the forefront of making that change were Charity Water. In order to tell their story, they changed the way they told their story. Traditionally, organizations had told their own story, what they did, what the problem was, how they were going to fix it. But they didn't focus on the big we, the idea of who their donors were, who those they were helping were, what were these personal stories, these personal connections. Charity Water did that. They did that in a few different ways. First, they created a brand. Whilst their mission is to give clean drinking water to those in the developing world, their North Star, the core of what they do, is actually to reinvent charity, to re-engage a generation that was extremely disillusioned with the idea of giving. And they've done that extraordinarily well. They close the donor cycle. They are with you every step of the way, where your money's going, who is it affecting, in a beautiful and engaging way. They built a real brand, a brand like Apple, a brand like any other for-profit brand. And they did this as well by launching an online fundraising platform that connected people to their friends and family and allowed them to share that story. And they used photography and video to have really compelling stories that uplifted you, not racked you with guilt in order to give, but really drew you in to the lives of these people whose lives were completely changed by having access to clean water. And while I've been to the field with them 8 times, you don't need to have gone to see it firsthand, because the creativity and the storytelling at Charity Water are so good that they immerse you in that wherever you may be. And that creativity, that drive, allowed Charity Water to scale at an unprecedented rate. I mentioned earlier that in 8 years, they have grown to an organization of over 60 people, having raised over $100 million. It's an extraordinary achievement. And it's one form of scale, and it was a scale that I wanted to recreate with BSpace. I wanted to find organizations that would be able to have this massive impact, to be able to grow and multiply their effect. And Charity Water obviously does this in what we call a breadth or horizontal scale. But that was the only scale that I was really interested in at first. I was like, we need to make things bigger. Greater impact means bigger, broader. And this is still true for many organizations that have a model that apply to that, to build thousands of wells in dozens of countries across hundreds of communities and to really multiply your effect. But I then met a man named Jake Leaf, and Jake started an organization called the Ubuntu Fund. And Ubuntu works in one community in South Africa, in Port Elizabeth, and it's done so for 15 years. 15 years it's worked in one community, developing a theory of development that they call cradle to career. It's an incredible model. It is the polar opposite of the Charity Water one, but it is equally valid. And Jake, in building this model, is incredibly open to people taking what they have learned, what they have used data to prove is serious impact that can lift this community out of poverty and give children a hope of a truly bright future. And to scale it to other places is not something he's interested in, but he's incredibly open to people coming, taking the model and replicating it themselves. But for Jake, what's important is the how, not the how many. And so at BSpace now, we look for both kinds of organizations, the Charity Waters and the Ubuntus. Both are equally valid models of scale, but different paths. To go to scale, however, is something that can never happen if you don't have organizational well-being and organizational learning in place. It's it's part of what really drove me to found BSpace. As I mentioned, I was working with organizations that wanted to do these things, that wanted to think like creatives, that wanted to use data and analytics and new technology platforms to really grow their organizations, but were just not able to. And a big piece of that is because they didn't have the building blocks of organizational well-being in place. Again, obvious in the for-profit sector, you invest in your people, you invest in professional training, you invest in leadership training for your management, you invest in management, full stop. Most nonprofits don't have executives. You have financial literacy, you put accounting models in place, you learn how to hire, how to fire, all of these HR and operational pieces that are not sexy in the slightest, and that most people don't talk about, but that are very much an afterthought in the nonprofit space. And part of this is an unhealthy relationship between donors and organizations. There's a number that's been floated, no one knows where it came from, that all nonprofits should work with 20% overhead operational budgets. We don't know why. Obviously, if as an organization, depending on your model, that could work or that could not work at all. And what it does is lead to extremely creative accounting. It's nothing illegal, but nonprofits are very creative about what goes in the programming bucket and what goes in the operations bucket. And it means that they also aren't as effective. I truly believe you can't have good programming without good operations. Programs don't magically appear in the field. They are implemented and refined and run by human beings. You have to invest in those human beings if you want those programs to be great. So we look a lot at BSpace at how do we put those building blocks in place? How do we teach fundamental basics that you need to have in order to be able to go to scale in whatever direction that may look like for your organization? And that's really, really important and key to us. So we have been slowly building on workshops and on lecture series to try and give that to our organizations, which really leads me to this. This is BSpace. This is actually our office. It's in New York. We currently work with 5 diverse organizations, working on a whole range of topics, all of them early stage, many of them with extremely young founders. Our youngest founder, well, we have a co-founder who's 17, but she doesn't work in the organization full time, but our youngest full-time founder is 22. And we believe, as you can see, in design and creativity. We think that you will do better work in a beautiful space. We truly believe that you need to be inspired when you come to work. So I built a model that is part co-working space, part design thinking, part tech incubator, and part VC investment platform, based on groups like IDEO, like Y Combinator, like Techstars, like WeWork, and hoping to pull it all together and apply it to the nonprofit space. So my organizations all work out of here. And alongside my team, they learn and grow side by side. And we offer them free rent, free office equipment, and we have a team who help them on everything from branding to digital engagement to programming strategy. It's all free. We're a nonprofit ourselves, so we try and practice what we preach. And it's been an enormous roller coaster ride because we are a startup housing startups. And that comes with its own set of somewhat chaotic, sometimes challenges, but it's been extremely rewarding, especially creatively. No 2 days are alike. I get to work with 5 really special organizations, and 6 if you include my own. And it's just extraordinary to watch them grow within the space, to build their organizations, to refine their programming, and to start to implement some of the ideas that I had 3 years ago. And like any good startup, BSpace is approaching its 1-year anniversary, and I'm sure as we reflect on our data, on our metrics, on what our mission means, we are going to pivot. We are going to make changes. After 11 months, we have an enormous amount of learning about what works, what doesn't, and what we can do better. And we are learning in huge gulps, not little sips. We are really absorbing everything we can as quickly as we can to better serve the groups that we house. And because of this sort of my commitment to being really open source, I hope to be able to share those learnings with the broader world. We already look to inspire the broader community of social entrepreneurs, but also of all entrepreneurs and the broader world to see, as we like to call it, a BSpace giving as a way of living. And so we have a lecture series once a month, which is open to the public in our space. We are trying to inspire our organizations to have the unsexy HR building blocks, to use technology, to think like a creative, but also to get out of their bubble, to get out of the nonprofit space. So our speakers come from a whole range of industries and backgrounds, and I find that often you find your greatest inspiration when you step out of your comfort zone or your box and listen to someone who's doing something completely different from what you're doing. But you'll find an unbelievable number of common threads regardless. So in whatever the future may hold for BSpace, I know my team and myself, whatever pivots we make, we will be united around the idea of profiting the world, and that's what we want to share with everyone, and that's summed up in this video that I will play you now.
It is complete independence that we want.
The women forged ahead in their new busy world.
Tonight, because of your splendid health.
But the United Nations is today as
It's an alternative to violence. So stay in bed and grow your hair.
And so the atmosphere heats up.
Our turn, now, to work for the wealth of good, to spark and stoke the audacious, to profit the world. It's our turn to give flight to the next generation of changemakers. Social entrepreneurs who are guided and supported by great thinkers and great innovators. To create bold new models of how to practice charity, advocate social change, mobilize relief, and accelerate recovery. Empower economic independence, protect the environment, or advocate for justice. Cross-pollination will build strong and enduring organizations, and we'll see concept to concrete outcome in months rather than years. For excellence, guided by empathy and creatively transformed into enterprise, ensures that positive social action becomes lasting global impact. The challenge is great, but the challengers are greater still. Elevating all of us, inspiring us to espouse giving as a way of living, to profit the world. Your turn, now.
So I want to thank all of you for having me here today, and I am happy to take any questions.